Good morning, and thank you all for attending this early morning meeting. I hope your caffeine has had time to suffuse your system. My name, as you may know, is Jared Ledbetter. I am the technology specialist and E-rate state coordinator for the state of Maine. And we have two things going on with this particular webinar, and they're both unrelated, but both sort of cover some of the same areas. And so I have become the Maine State Library expert on both of these initiatives. The first one is the Emergency Connectivity Fund, which we'll discuss first, and we'll reserve the second part of the meeting to discuss Project Connect. If you're here to learn about the Emergency Connectivity Fund, you are in the right place at the right time. And I hope this will be at least a little informative for you. I just want to give you an idea as to how much information there is. This is not going to be a nuanced take on the Emergency Connectivity Fund. This is dealing with a federal program that the order of which surpasses 100 pages of very dense information. So there's a lot going into it, and I'm trying to encapsulate that to the point where I can just give you the overview. And without further ado, why don't we go ahead and start that process? Here's the meeting agenda for everyone. We just want to, like I said before, we want to dedicate the first half of the presentation to the ECF, and we want to dedicate the second half to Project Connect. So if you're just interested in the Emergency Connectivity Fund, once we reach the Project Connect, just go ahead and feel free to drop out. And we'll take it from there. We will have a period when I'm done with the presentation to ask questions, but if you want to start using the chat to begin asking questions as you go along, we can do that as well. I want to describe, first of all, what the Emergency Connectivity Fund is. It's federal legislation that was tied into the American Rescue Plan Act that amounts to $7.1 billion earmarked specifically for schools and libraries that are attempting to bridge the gap of education, basically what they call in schools the education gap, and what we refer to as the digital divide or the internet gap. We in Maine are very aware of the problem where there's a lot of broadband in the more urban areas and very little broadband, very few options for broadband in some of our more rural areas. So there are some people that are able to get really fast speeds in the state, but there's a lot more of the state that can't, and in some areas don't have any option for internet access. In many of your libraries, in fact, you are going to be the ones to provide that service to your community. And one of the ways that you can do that now is through using the Emergency Connectivity Fund. It's really aimed at students and library patrons that need access to educational resources that they can't get without going to the school or the library. So I say, just as shorthand, I say lacking home internet access. That can mean a lot of different things. That can imply, for example, if you have a nursing home in your community that doesn't have internet access, that would be a potential beneficiary of the Emergency Connectivity Fund by way of the library. Or other resources like, for example, if you just want to have a laptop loaning program, you can do that through the Emergency Connectivity Fund. There's a number of different options here, but as always with any sort of program like this, there are also a lot of hidden costs, not just monetary costs, but cost in staff time and expertise, and of course, bureaucracy. So let me go ahead and just unravel a lot of the confusing parts to this. Let me go ahead and move to the next slide. This is going to begin very, very quickly. And we learned about it a few months ago, but the rules were they hadn't been calcified until just earlier this month. Furthermore, a lot of the questions that are bubbling up in light of those rules have not yet been answered. And I'll try to address the questions that we know the answers to, as well as the questions to which we do not know the answers. Again, this is going to start in mid to late June, it's predicted. It will be open for 45 days. I should say the very first window will be open for 45 days. There will be multiple windows. The first window addresses any sort of projects that you want to make purchases for starting in July 2021, this year, going through June of 2022. After that window is complete, a second window will open for retroactive purchases made from March 2020 through to June 2021. And then if there's funding left over, they'll open more windows until the funding is depleted. And this is really going to be done, for those of you who had been on some of the earlier statewide meetings where this was discussed, I really wanted not to use the term E-rate, but now my hand has been forced. It will be managed through the same people that manage the E-rate process, using a modified version of that E-rate process. And that's good and bad in a lot of ways. The good is that the process is pretty well understood, pretty well, I guess, formulated. So there's a lot of expertise and a lot of knowledge already out there about this process. However, the bad is that E-rate can be cumbersome. It's sort of like filing your taxes. If you had to file your taxes several times per year, it can feel like that a little bit, but at the same time, we do have the expertise to lower the difficulty threshold, the speed bump, as it were, of that bureaucracy. So let me go ahead and move to the next slide. Oop, I went up a slide. Let's try this again. So let's talk a little bit about the pros and the cons of this process. There are definitely pros. And one of the major pros to this ECF process is something I refer to as pre-reimbursement, which is to say, they are actually fronting money for projects prior to the purchase of the equipment and services that you would need for that project. So this is actually unprecedented in the E-rate process. Normally you have to pay the money up front and then they reimburse you. However, they have chosen for the E-rate, the ECF process, that you are going to be eligible to get that money beforehand, so that you can apply it directly to the costs of your project, and it does not have to come out of an existing budget. You get the budget from them, you get the money from them, and then you can pay the bill. So that's actually one of the really good pros of this program. It's for 100% of eligible equipment and services, with a caveat, and I'll get to that caveat here shortly. The process has been streamlined. It's not as onerous as the standard E-rate process. In fact, they cut out the first part of the E-rate process, which is the competitive bidding requirement. That's one less step to worry about. And they are streamlining this process so it happens in a matter of months rather than going over the course of a couple of years. So that, of course, is definitely a pro as well. They are prioritizing these funds for rural libraries and schools that are in needy communities. In fact, this is where the National School Lunch Program data is going to come in. Part of the assessment of a library or a school's application is looking at that information. And then libraries and schools are in the very highest percentile of need will receive the first wave of funding. They're going to be the ones prioritized when it comes to having their projects approved. And then finally, for those of you familiar with the E-rate process, when you're applying, you need to work with vendors that have also bought into the E-rate process. However, with the ECF, you can actually work with vendors that are not part of the process. And this is especially good for those libraries that have already done some of the eligible work, some of the eligible projects under the ECF, so that you could receive reimbursement for those funds that you have already paid. That would be in the second wave, as it were, the second window of applications. So if you've already worked with a vendor on buying new equipment starting from March 2020 through to June of this year, you may be able to see some of that money returned to you by using the second wave of the ECF to do so. However, there are cons to this process, meaning they've pushed a lot of the bureaucracy firmly into the applicant's ball court. You're going to have to handle most of the their application process, and there's a lot of additional sort of documentation that needs to happen above and beyond what normally happens under E-rate. You're going to need to activate accounts to enable the process of applying. The EPC is called the E-rate Productivity Center, and the SAM is I don't remember the acronym right now, but it's the federal government's way of dispersing funds. So those two accounts are something that you would need to activate, and you would want to do so in relatively short order, only because there can be a delay or a complication to the process. Great questions. I'll get to those in just one second. There can be a delay. In fact, with the SAM account, there can be a delay of up to 3 weeks in getting your account activated. So if you count 3 weeks away from now, that's about when the window might begin to open. So, Holly, two things. One, I'm happy to help with the application process, though I might not be the first line of defense that you might have. Since I don't have sort of insider access to the EPC or to SAM, we have other resources to help you guide through that application process. But I can help you with the Form 471. I can help you with the Form 472. I can help you with a lot of the other steps, and especially the documentation and the minutiae that you might need to be aware of if you're choosing to engage in the ECF. Thank you, Deb. The spin is basically suggesting that a service provider has engaged in the E-rate process. You do not have to work with a vendor that has done so, as I said before. One of the other cons with this process is that you really need to be focusing upon promoting remote library service. And here it's a little uncertain of how much you have to go in that direction, but open internet access, just lending out a laptop on its own, is not going to be considered prioritizing remote library services. So you'd really want to think about how you promote your library services, and, for example, include some additional resources on a tablet or desktop that would help funnel people to library resources, to online resources that you would support, such as digital main or other things like that. So you would want to consider how you would customize the devices you would be loaning so that people would be more or less directed toward your library or general library services. Open internet, like I said, is not sufficient to check that box. They're also stating that they are going to have you discuss or elaborate upon your community's unmet needs. Basically, when this this order was given, the role that it's supposed to fill is engaging that educational gap or divide for students and library patrons where they live out or any place outside the library. Ebooks and cloud library would be fine as one of those resources, but yeah, you want to be thinking about how you would present these projects. For example, I could see in a nursing home having a digital literacy tablet lab having a home there, or laptop lab having a home there, being funded by the ECF. Or having a kiosk somewhere which has some of your library services. Those sorts of things could be potentially eligible under the ECF. But you need to be able to speak to what your community needs are. And that could be as thorough as performing a community needs assessment, targeting the digital divide. So I don't feel comfortable saying that an informal understanding of your community needs is going to be enough. They're going to want you to discuss specific numbers, why you chose to purchase 10 tablets. So just think about that and keep that in the back of your mind. And finally, I know that we have all heard the term CIPA, the Children's Internet Protection Act. We had high hopes that they would say, don't worry about it. Unfortunately, you have to worry about it. We have some potential answers for CIPA, but it's still one more hurdle for libraries and schools to have to surmount. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward. I'm already a little bit behind the time. So let's talk about eligible equipment and services. Connected devices are eligible, network devices are eligible, and cellular services are eligible. So for libraries, that means laptops and tablets, up to $400 per device. Remember how I'd said earlier, 100% of costs are considered eligible? They make exceptions for laptops and tablets. They make exceptions for MiFi devices, and they make exceptions for cellular servers. They create these caps. You can pay more for the devices, but they are only going to reimburse $400 per device for laptops and tablets, with the potential exception of if you have disabled users, then you can do a case-by-case waiver for those. Desktops will not be considered eligible. Smartphones are not considered eligible. Wi-Fi devices, such as MiFis or Air cards, are considered eligible up to $250 per device. However, anything that's going to be used for in-house, like you can't upgrade your library's wireless network. That is not considered to be eligible under the ECF. And then if you are choosing to have MiFi devices, they assume that you're going to do a bulk purchase of data plans with a maximum of $25 per month per data plan being reimbursable. So I know there's going to be some questions on that, but that sort of gives you an idea as to how much money they're going to permit for your projects based upon connected devices, network devices, and services. So here's a very, very basic overview of what that process is going to look like. You can currently begin, if you want to start taking steps towards this, planning and budgeting what it is that you are intending to gain from the ECF. So if you have, projects in mind, then now would be the time to start really itemizing what those look like, getting your EPC and your SAM activated, and doing a full community needs assessment if that's something that you feel you have not yet done. If you don't have a good handle on those needs, now would be the time to really consider that. Once mid to late June happens, they'll announce the opening of the very first application window. And that window will be open for 45 days, so probably through July, maybe into early August. We hope at the very least that sounds about reasonable, but 45 days, it's going to be a very hard deadline for the first application window. So I encourage you, if you are interested in engaging in the ECF, move toward getting things squared away now so that when the window opens, you'll be able to go through that process quickly. When you are ready to actually engage in the application process, that will mean having selected a vendor, getting a contract with a vendor or more than one vendor, and completing what's called the Form 471. That's part of the E-rate process. That will be where you sort of formalize your arrangement with the ECF. And then after that application has gone in, you'll sit on that for a little while until you receive an acknowledgement letter saying, yes, we have approved your project. Once that's happened, you gather all the invoices and receipts that you received, and then you can file for reimbursement up to 60 days after you've received that approval letter. So you can see, for at least for the federal government, this whole process is going at a breakneck pace, especially when compared to the E-rate window, where you had 3-4 months to complete certain stages of that process. So that's something to keep in mind. It's happening fast, and it's a busy time of the year for libraries. So it's not like your schedule isn't already going to be pretty filled up. But we want you to be, at the very least, aware that this is going to be going really, really quickly. Just give me 1 second. We have one more person that needs to get a link. And all right. So moving right along, I know I'm cutting into the Project Connect time a little bit, but page down. So here are some of the next steps that you can take in order to really get ready for the process. Like I said before, during either committing to a specific project and determining the need around that project, that will help you then determine what items or services that you need to purchase. If you are going to do any sort of lending of MiFis, one of the things that we have learned in the lending of MiFis is understanding the cellular coverage in your community. That can be a real hurdle, especially for communities that have, let's just say, not flat topology. If you have hills and mountains and whatnot, and you have a cell phone tower on the other side of the mountain and things like that, you might find that one vendor works well for communities in this area, and another vendor works well for communities in this area, and never the twain shall meet. So having a good idea of what the cellular coverage is in your community will help if you do decide to lend out MiFi devices as part of your ECF project. Activating your EPC and SAM accounts are definitely two very concrete steps that you can take to prepare. Starting to work with vendors. Once you have a good idea of the cellular coverage and the items that you need to purchase, then you can really start to work with vendors, get the best price that you can, and have that ready to go so that when the time comes, you can quickly finalize your budget, finalize your purchasing decisions. Another step to consider is the impact upon your staff, especially for libraries that only have one staff member and perhaps a few volunteers. You really want to consider, is this going to be a project that, what will be sustainable for you? Because if there's any technology troubleshooting that needs to happen, they're going to come to you. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. But it's still, I shouldn't say that should not daunt you from engaging in this process if it interests you. Once you finalize the budget, you sign the contracts with vendors, and then the window opens, you can file a Form 471. So that's basically what the the next steps will look like for you if you want to engage. I want to massage some expectations here. After you have made your purchases, there are going to be some additional steps to take before you deploy laptops, tablets, MiFi devices. First of all, there is a considerable inventorying requirement. The services, you need to be able to identify and record the type of service. For example, if you have a MiFi, you're buying a data plan with that. We want to know the details of the data plan. What's the speed of the data plan? When does the start date end? When does it start? When does it end? If you have devices, they want make and model and serial number and how long they were deployed. And if you are deploying these to individuals, especially on a semi-permanent basis, they want to know for whom, who is the borrower. We are getting some, we're giving some pushback on that just because there is definitely a conflict with Maine state law because of our privacy laws. We may be able to withhold that information from them. So that's one of the things that we really want to be concerned about is how much information we end up having to share based upon the laws, but we are definitely going to be pushing back, and ALA is backing us on this. So Joanna, yeah, I understand your concern, and we are hopefully going to get a solid answer on that shortly. That's not a bad idea. I think I will let Jen know about this. I don't think she's in the call. So yes, getting them on board would help. Policy requirements. For these devices to circulate, you're going to have to take your existing acceptable use policy and append a paragraph onto it that allows the borrowing patron to confirm that they have no ability to access these services if not for the service or equipment that you are providing. So they want a patron to attest to the fact that they have no internet, no devices. If you're if you're loaning them a MiFi, you're loaning them a device, that's what they would be attesting to. And just to be aware, all E-rate data retention is 10 years. So it's going to happen from the last day of service or equipment that you have. For 10 years after that, you need to retain the documentation. That's an unprecedented, I should say, amount of data retention. So it certainly does not comply with normal data retention rules. Just keep that in mind if you're going to apply. And then there's the SIPA requirements. We're hoping to work with Network Maine on having some good filtering options if you are going to loan devices. But you can also work with cellular providers to install parental controls if you're working with them for MiFi devices. A parental control can be through the internet appliance as well as the tablet or laptop. So that's another option. But if you are an MSLN library, you will almost certainly have to worry about SIPA. If you're not an MSLN library, then we can talk and see whether or not you will have to worry about SIPA, but probably not in those cases. Some unanswered questions with regard to this process. There are some libraries that are municipal that do not have a separate checking account or banking account from their town. If that's the case, we are working with the ALA to see what options exist for those libraries. There is some hope that there is something called an EBT waiver that would allow you to avoid direct deposit reimbursement they might cut a check instead. But we're hoping that the ALA will push back on them enough that you will have options. Patron privacy, obviously we have some concerns there. We're going to be looking into specifically where their ability to request information stops and where patron privacy starts. That's going to vary from state to state based upon privacy laws, but we believe that our privacy laws should definitely take precedence over what they're requesting, especially since that is a really hard point for library ethics, that we not take in a lot of this information. So that's something to be aware of. It doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't begin the process, but we're going to get a better answer for you once the ALA has had a chance to engage and push back on that particular issue. And we have some real concerns that SIPA compliance will be a little laborious, but we are working with Network Maine. We feel like we do have a good answer in most cases, especially for laptops versus tablets. But for many tablets, there are existing parental controls that would suffice for SIPA compliance. I can talk to you individually a little bit more about what that would mean based upon your project, but it's still a little bit of a gray area. So, any last questions before we move on to the next part? All right, Melissa, you want me to go ahead and unmute you?
Thank you.
Sure.
And I came in late, so I may have missed this. I apologize. So something that we were thinking about, it would be some tablets to just have for kind of like a lawn library outdoors, to be able to access, to access the Wi-Fi outside and or inside, but outside in the summer. And I'm just wondering, would this cover that? And if so, in terms of the privacy issues, is that more, or gathering that data, is that if you lend it to go off of the library premises? Or is that also for short-term lending for a few hours in the library or outside?
You may have missed the part. One of the primary aspects of this program is that it's for off-premises educational access. So that has to be the top priority, being able to lend it to somebody who would then take it home, for example. And that can be for any number of reasons, but you need to really be prioritizing library services off of the library premises. So having something that can go out on the lawn would not satisfy that aspect of the ECF. I'm concerned. I have the same concerns as you. The good news is that if a device is not being actively loaned, it can be used in-house, but you have to prioritize it for remote lending, remote access to services. So if you're going to look into a project like that, you're going to want to come at it from the opposite direction, which is to say, if somebody wants to take it home with them, that's sort of the person's needs who would be prioritized under the ECF. And then while it happens to be at the library, it can go anywhere within the library. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you. Deborah, great question. Individual libraries will be responsible for applying, but there's no reason that you can't work together in regions to address a common need. As for example, if you wanted to do some partnerships with the career centers and have tablets that are specific, tablets or laptops that are specifically aimed at helping people get back into the workforce, you could certainly make that happen. And that could be sort of a county-wide effort. So you would be responsible for applying for a certain number under your library. Somebody else could be responsible for a certain number under their library, and you could share the project sort of name and branding and effort to get the word out there if you wanted to. So that's definitely, I would say that's a worthwhile thing to consider, how you can work with regional libraries to address a common need. But ultimately, you're not going to be applying with other libraries. You're going to be applying on an individual basis. Does that answer your question? Okay, great. Okay, if there are no other questions regarding this, I'm going to go ahead and start on the Project Connect side of things. Sorry, Michelle. Weird timing. Let me go ahead and move along to the next part. If you are not interested in Project Connect, I bid you farewell. Have a great day. You are certainly welcome to stick around if you would like. I am asking Deborah to stick around just because she is one of the most recent beneficiaries of Project Connect. Let me go ahead and move to the next slide. So Project Connect is a project based upon the Informational Technology Disaster Resource Center. They're a nonprofit that engages communities on a national basis. They've been all over the place. They've been Pennsylvania, they've been New Mexico, they've been Washington State. And most recently, they were in Vermont. And they decided, while we're in Vermont, why don't we just sweep through New Hampshire and come into Maine? So we were made aware of them when they made a partnership with Network Maine, who first promoted their projects. And we reached out to them and said, we'd like to work with you on raising awareness within libraries and hopefully engaging those libraries so that they can be aware of the benefits that Project Connect can bring to their communities. It's definitely a big effort. It's definitely a great effort. They strive to make this as low cost, if not no cost, to the community as they possibly can. They really seek out the places where their efforts are going to make the biggest impact. And traditionally, that has been a number of schools, a number of libraries, but it also counts other public resources, including places like homeless shelters or fire stations, any place that you could open up a broadband wireless network to the public. They don't want this going into an industrial area. They don't want this going into a commercial area necessarily, but being able to have something where the wireless is there for the public and it's free and open, that's where they feel that they can make the most benefit, especially if a community doesn't have a lot of those. So applications are being accepted as of now. They're going to remain in Maine until the job is done. They did say, even if the time is not right for some libraries to engage in Project Connect, they will continue soliciting applications. And once they reach a critical mass of those, they would be happy to return to me. So even if now doesn't seem like a great time for you, your library, your community, you can think it over, get to a point where maybe in the future you could apply, and in time they will return. And you can apply by going straight to their website. I've listed the URL there. It will be in the PDF that I send around once we're done with this. But Deborah, can I unmute you just so you can talk about what it was like for your process? Deborah Lay is the director of the Vose Library in Union, and she is the most recent beneficiary of the Project Connect.
Thanks, Jared. I'm
Thank
happy
you.
to talk about this. We have our sticker. Yay!
Nice. Nice.
It was super easy. So I filled out that application. There were things I had no idea what, the technical stuff. And yet Dustin Lee still reached out to me. We had about a 45-minute Zoom session or Google Meet session one Friday afternoon. And he walked me through all of what was going to happen. That was April 23rd. And last week, May 21st, two gentlemen showed up with a van and they got right to work. And they had to drill through the building, and they actually wired it outside and along the building. So we have one of those white hanging devices in the corner of our building. I was so excited to put this sign down at the end of the street and just blast everybody with, come get our Wi-Fi. When Dustin and I met through Google Meet, he was ready. He had an aerial map of our library. And what he did was he just showed me where the boost would go. And it extends all the way down our driveway, which is pretty lengthy. And we have two apartment buildings next to us. And before my time here, we were lending hotspots out that apparently these apartment buildings were using, they were trading off with each other with the hotspots instead of bringing them back to the library because they really need them. So I said to him, hey, see those two apartment buildings? Can you boost to them too? And he said, no, we can't do that. They're not nonprofits. But he said they will have some residual from this boost. So I'm just hoping that they get it,
Yeah.
But it was super easy. The guys that came were very polite and respectful that we had our doors open and had patrons here. I couldn't have asked for any better service. It's amazing.
Thank you. That is really great to hear. I think it's been, it's a little nerve-wracking to hear about, people who are going to come in and do something for free. There's always a little, speaking, you always have concerns that free means not a great job.
Yeah.
These guys are definitely professionals.
Yes.
These guys know exactly what they're doing, and their mission is very concretely to support your library and its endeavors, and not just your library, but potentially your community.
Right.
This is a great way of doing outreach to your community, even if your library cannot directly benefit. You can be sort of the mediator, the middleman, to engage those people, those organizations in your community that could benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you can't support boosting your own library's wireless, you can make that happen for your community.
That's right. And I just want to say to anybody that's considering this, as soon as Dustin said, so you're connected to Susie Strout, and I went, yes. So, I felt that connection right away and felt totally at ease because Susie called me the next week and said, we've got it covered. So I think everybody should go for it. It's fantastic.
Thank you. That is very reassuring. And yes, one of the things that we're very happy about is Network Maine has very much engaged in the process here. They've traditionally been hands-off with a library's wireless connection, and whatever benefits that they've had have been either Susie doing things informally or just what they can do at what's called a router level. They usually can't look into a library's wireless, but with this program, they have agreed to do a limited amount of troubleshooting going forward so that Susie can be a contact point for you. You don't have to contact the ITDRC. Susie can actually help you if you are a beneficiary of this program.
And so can I just say one more thing, Vera, and then I'll be quiet.
No worries.
I'm just thrilled about this. The other added feature that they're giving us is something called Unify, so that we have the ability to track the clients that are using our outside Wi-Fi. I was using CloudTrax, but they're asking if we will use this when they put this up. And so it's very similar to CloudTrax, where we can keep track of numbers for data. So it's great.
Yeah. Why don't we go ahead and move along? Just to manage some expectations on this front, like Deborah said earlier, if you're an MSLN library, then you're bound by E-rate rules not to intentionally project wireless networks beyond the bounds of your property. And here, I can't stress this enough. An audit, however unlikely that audit may be, could cause some serious repercussions, not for your library, but for the entirety of MSLN. That's unfortunate. We had hoped that they would be relaxing E-rate rules regarding wireless networks and property bounds, but to date they have not. And so we have to proceed as if they will not. So be mindful of this. This is something where it's really intended to boost the signal around your library, and so that you can straight face that you are engaging in E-rate rules. Now, there is, as Deborah pointed out, occasionally some bleed over. If it's bleed over, that's one thing. If you've got a wireless access point near the edge of your property, probably not the same thing. So just keep that in mind. That's very important to establish. That you don't get yourself and the network in trouble by pushing the wireless out too far. At the point of connection, you will need to have, at the point of installation, you'll need an internet connection and you'll need a power conduit. ITDRC tends to prefer outdoor installations because that will give the greatest bang for the buck. It will give the greatest projection. But they are also considering indoor installations and replacements, especially if you're relying upon older or consumer grade equipment. This will help bring you up to speed. And by up to speed, I mean ready for the gigabit bandwidth that MSLN will be bringing to your door shortly. We at the Maine State Library are partnering with ITDRC. What our hope is that we will be able to fund them for a number of libraries who need to have their wireless entirely replaced, and to get coding in that will gather wireless statistics easily. The numbers have been laid out, but the question is just, will we be able to afford funding for 20 libraries? Will we be able to afford funding for 50 libraries? How far can we go with what money we can dedicate to this project? So we're still ironing that out, but our hope is for libraries who want to participate in this, not only will you be brought up to speed from a wireless overhaul, but you'll be able to satisfy statistics gathering, and you'll be ready for gigabit throughput on your wireless network. So there's a lot of reasons to get behind this project, but we just want to manage your expectations about it so that you're aware whether or not it's something that you really want to pursue. We encourage you to do so, even if you're not 100% certain, because as Deborah pointed out, Dustin, he's a fantastic guy. He will work with you and help you determine whether or not you're really a good candidate for this project. And most of the time, the answer is going to be yes. Let me just go ahead and step on to the next steps. Some of the things that you might want to do if you are intending on engaging in Project Connect: take stock of your existing devices. That does include, for example, the location of existing wireless access points, sort of having an idea as to where the boundaries of your wireless connectivity go. And if you do have these network devices, having the ability to access them, meaning the username and password, would be helpful to them so that when they show up, it's not a matter of scrambling and getting that information from somewhere. This will be important if they need to operate within the confines of your existing network. But if you can't find that information, we'll work out a way of getting it. Being able to identify the areas where you don't have any coverage, including inside, because then if you discover that there are areas inside your library that aren't giving coverage, that's a very good case for establishing inside access points so that you can get a really decent coverage, really decently strong signal inside your library. I encourage you to do outreach to your community so that you can find organizations that would benefit from Project Connect, because that makes you, I think, again, an ambassador for your community. You're working with Project Connect to identify areas of need, and in doing so, you're really supporting your community in a very strong way by bringing them in, even if your library isn't the direct beneficiary. And then finally, apply even if you're not certain that you're going to be the best candidate. Dustin will help you suss that out. It will be one of those things where you have the 45-minute call. You'll go over all the information that he has to provide, and then you can decide, yeah, we'd be really happy to continue with this, or maybe we'll reassess in a couple of years. All right, I think we can move on. Any final questions about Project Connect? I do want to reinforce that the website, let me go ahead and just put this into chat. They have a built-in FAQ. So if there are some questions I haven't answered, they do have a lot of those there. Michelle, that's a great question. I think the notion there is going to be shady at best. I would say if you have something, if you have an access point on the front of your building facing the park, you'll be okay. If you put something out into the park, that would be sketchier. And I feel like you're better off being cautious in this regard. Only because, again, I know it's one of those sort of dartboard approaches to things that you may or may not ever see in audits. But in the unlucky event that you ever were audited, that would be, I would rather you take a steady degree of caution for how far you go out. Dustin is very well aware about the E-rate quandary. And so he could help shape the network so that if there happens to be some spillover into the park, great, but he is aware that it can be a real issue. So I would say work with him to determine what good placement would be for an access point so that you're not jeopardizing the consortium. It can get, I'm sorry that that's a very sort of wishy-washy answer. I'd love to say, drop it right in the park. I cannot advise you to do that, however. I have to say, be mindful of where the library boundaries are. Good news is that modern wireless access points have a really great strength. So they will project very, very far. As long as you aren't deliberately putting something right into the park, I think you'll be all right. And I think the park will get some coverage from it. Again, not my decision, not the way I prefer it to be, but it's just to keep the network safe. John Roy, yes, you are absolutely right. If the connection that they are going to be putting an access point on does not receive federal funding from E-rate, then we don't care where it goes. You can work with them to put it anywhere. So you could work with your town, see if you couldn't get a funded separate connection, not on MSLN, cap it with an access point, and you can put that anywhere. That's one of the things that, you know, is a little unfortunate, because as Deb points out, conceivably, ECF funds could be used to get an access point or a connection somewhere, which you could then cap off with Project Connect. But it's all happening at once, so I'm not sure that the timing would work out. If you're really fast, maybe it would. But Project Connect, I don't anticipate that they're going to be here through July. I think they're going to be done by probably end of June at this rate. So it would be almost impossible, I think, to do the timing correctly to get ECF funded internet connectivity somewhere and get Project Connect to cap that off. It's sad to say, it's almost like we wanted Project Connect to wait 6 months and then we could do something, but it's just not the way it is. Any other questions? Anything that I haven't answered? I'm sorry, I haven't really been paying full attention to the chat. All right, if no other questions, I'm really going to encourage you, if you don't have, if you have specific questions, you need specific help for applying for the ECF, you want a little bit more consulting on that front, I am happy to help. I'm happy to work through the application process with you, step by step. I can help you, if I can't help you directly, I can bring you to the people who can. And so we'll go ahead and close this out. I'm going to stop the recording. What are we saying now?